everyone. Welcome back to the second episode of The Prompt. We are back for more, and if you made it to our second episode, we are so happy to have you. Basically, our only focus this episode is to not make the entire time talking about the submarine saga, so we will do our hardest. Today, Krista, Alton, and I are super excited to review something that Jasper put together called the AI Trends Report. We basically went out and surveyed 500 people about their sentiment on AI, their thoughts, their best use cases, and their worst fears. And so we're really excited to unpack that with you guys today.
Yes, it was very insightful. I feel like there's so many fun nuggets to kind of pick apart with y'all, and I'm super excited to hear like y'all's thoughts on all of it. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, should definitely be an awesome conversation. I think we can kick it off with a pretty big question. So based on all of the data insights that are in the report, what surprised both of you the most?
So one of the questions was like, how satisfied are you with the quality of the content that you're getting from AI tools, from generative AI tools? And I think I was really surprised at like how there weren't a lot of people who were unsatisfied with the outputs. I think unsatisfied was like the lowest possible option they could choose. And some of the, I think we surveyed everybody from freelancers all the way up to C-suite, and there were certain levels and tiers that, it wasn't even 1% of the people who were unsatisfied. And that really shocked me, not because I think they should be unsatisfied, but because there's so much discourse around these tools and the quality and whether or not you can create high quality content with AI. That it was very intriguing to see that, like, okay, the people who are using them, they are actually very satisfied with what they're getting, and not many people have issues with it. So I don't know, that was like something I didn't expect to see.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about generative AI is, even coming from a background in working in B2B SaaS, basically my whole career, right? You're like selling these really expensive pieces of enterprise technology that promise productivity. We're going to make your employees more productive. We're going to make your customers more productive on your platform and more efficient. And most of these software realistically took years to implement and then years to see ROI on. So I think the really, really cool thing about generative AI and why ChatGPT has taken everyone by storm is because those productivity gains are realized in a matter of minutes versus years, right? You can like quantitatively say, I saved X amount of hours today just by using ChatGPT or by using another AI tool. So I think that that 65% that feel like generative AI makes their job easier, I'm like, you are liars. I feel like that should be up at 90%, and the 10% is the times that you didn't use AI, which is sort of what I find. Something that I thought was interesting is maybe it's like just some of the negative sentiment I've been seeing in the media lately. I think with Congress, the congressional hearings, and sort of everyone talking about this AI doom, I thought that number would be higher in terms of I'm scared I'm going to lose my job. And I actually didn't find it to be as high as I thought. So that was a little surprising to me because I think, the clickbait right now is how quickly you're going to lose your job and what can you do about it. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to see that.
Yeah, that's what stood out to me the most and really surprised me the most. I really thought that number was going to be higher across the board. And not only that, but I thought it was going to be higher across the board for like individual contributors and freelancers specifically, because in that discourse, it seems like people are most afraid of like those types of jobs disappearing as opposed to the higher level jobs. And what was another thing that was really interesting within that same chart was the fact that VPs and directors seem to be the most afraid that their job is at risk from AI, which is like, I don't know, almost like funny to me. Because to me, if you're at that high level and you're worried that AI is going to take your job, then are you really doing the best job in in that role? Like that might say more about you than it does about the technology. So I thought that was funny. But then when you go to C-suite professionals, they are the least concerned about AI taking their jobs, which makes sense because I mean, to me, like C-suite, VP, director roles, they're all people based. They're all based on relationships. They're based on like time management. And humans are like really, really well adapted to doing that stuff. Whereas like a tech tool isn't the best at developing interpersonal relationships, maintaining those relationships. So I just thought that the differences in that fear between C-suite, VP, and director was really, really surprising for sure.
Yeah. And with the VP role, it was what surprised me about that was how polarizing that was, because I think that was the one where it was like split 50-50 almost, where 50% were worried and then 50% were not. And so it's like, what's going on there, where like half of you are concerned and the other half are like, I'm good, no worries here. But yeah, I found that interesting. I also found it interesting on the question of like, how often do you use generative AI tools? The IC level was shockingly low, considering I would think, like, I would assume IC individual contributors are some of the highest users of generative AI. But it that kind of went to freelancers and solopreneurs. So maybe the ICs are the ones managing freelancers, and then the freelancers are the ones using the tool more. Yeah, I don't really know what's going on there, but I was like very surprised to see that not as many ICs, at least they don't report using it in their day to day, which I don't know, it was strange to me.
And something that like is correlated to that was individual contributors rated the highest level of dissatisfaction with the outputs and the quality and things like that. And to me, that kind of makes sense because I at least see individual contributors being more in the weeds, and freelancers and stuff too, to a certain degree, when it comes to building out like net new blog posts, building out net new social media posts and things like that, where the quality, like, and whether or not outputs are generic, whether or not they're in brand voice, that stuff matters a lot at that level because they're the ones responsible for producing that stuff at a higher rate than a manager or a VP, for instance. So because some might be using it less because they have experience in, all right, I need to produce X amount of blog posts this week. I've been using this tool to use it. It hasn't been giving me quite as many good outputs as I would like, so I'm going to step away from it. I think that is going to change probably pretty dramatically over the next year as these models get more advanced and things like that. But yeah, I definitely found that pretty interesting as well.
Yeah. Do y'all think there was any level of people being a little bit hesitant to admit that they use AI a lot in their jobs? Because I think I don't know if that's still true as of like today, now that it's so explosively popular, but I do think there has been a time where people were testing it, but they didn't really want their bosses to know they were testing it, or just some like hesitancy around, yes, I'm using these tools. Um, and yeah, I'm curious if that found its way into that data at all, in
It's
the
so
lower
funny how
levels.
that flipped.
Yeah,
Like,
I
just
know.
like what you were saying, Krista, right? You're like sort of nervous to say, like, wait, I was an early adopter. I've been experimenting with AI, or maybe it was some people's like secret weapon that they didn't tell anybody about, or they just expensed on the company credit card and it was a couple $100s a year and sort of just went unnoticed. And all of a sudden, the message that you're really hearing from leaders is your team should be using AI. How are you using AI? How are we incorporating AI into not only our product, but the way you work day to day? And so you're almost penalized if you're not using AI. And I think that's pretty normal, right? For like every new piece of technology. But I think how quickly it's happened is wild, where it's completely flipped. A super interesting conversation I had last week. We were all in New York. We hosted this dinner focused on generative AI for just like folks in New York. And it was really cool. We got together with a ton of people from a bunch of different industries, not just tech. And a conversation topic that came up is a woman, a head of marketing, was saying, listen, I came to this dinner and tomorrow I'm supposed to sign on the dotted line to hire a new content agency. I haven't asked the question of, do you use AI in your content? I'm using them for SEO. I'm using them for editorial content. Are they using AI? Are they not using AI? And it started this really interesting dialogue at the table around, I think one way to look at it is, hey, if agencies are using AI and they're not telling me and they're still charging me some sort of market rate, I have that emotional feeling that I'm being gypped. And I think my focus was, if I have an agency, and I have in the past, they aren't using AI, I don't feel like they're adopting technology. The emotional connection I have is, maybe you're not a cream of the crop agency. Like, maybe you're not a team of early adopters that's going to go out there. And that's what I want from my agency. I want you to be more experimental, move faster than me, take more risks, use all of the tools out there available to you, and teach me about it. So it was this really interesting like push and pull where all of us saw each other's side. And ultimately we were like, have the conversation with the agency tomorrow and let us know how it goes. So I think that's also a good evolution that we should keep our eyes on.
Yeah, that is very interesting, because I feel like obviously, like, we worked with a really great SEO and content agency, and they obviously were using Jasper and testing a bunch of other tools. And I was very excited about that, just because, okay, great, now they're going to understand like us better, and they're just going to be, like you said, ahead of the curve, which I think is really important right now. So that makes sense. Yeah.
And I think there's way more leniency toward AI because of the fact that Google, has Bard now. That is a widely accessible thing that people have tons of access to. And there's so many other platforms that have AI baked into it now. It's becoming more of a common thing almost, and like an uncommon thing. It's almost like your favorite software platform, if it doesn't have AI in it and hasn't announced that it's coming out with AI, that it probably will soon. So I feel like that is making it a lot easier for people to accept that this is something that is going to be part of the workforce for the foreseeable future. And there's less skepticism around using it, and not only using it, but like telling other people that you're using it instead of being like kind of sneaky with it,
Yeah, a couple things are coming to mind, Alton, from your statement, kind of tying back to our report. That statement that I find to be so true. I mean, it could be applied in like so many different contexts, but you're usually afraid of what you don't know. And I almost feel like some of that fear around AI is going to take my job was because people didn't understand it. They didn't know how they could practically apply it, that it was sort of our weapon to be wielded in our own hands. It sort of felt like something scary and unknown. And I wonder if even that, my comment on, wow, I thought people would be more afraid and that number has really gone down, is because there's more education around it. There's more ability to interact with these tools and get in there and see how you're able to wield it. So I think that's a really, really interesting point. I also think, to that point of you saying, we're seeing every piece of technology or technology providers saying like, and now we have AI and that's the new fancy product release. Like, it's the AI. It's really interesting from a marketing perspective around marketing teams having to get really defensive with the rest of the organization around having AI and slapping the two letters within ads or within marketing copy or within landing pages and expecting that messaging to convert isn't necessarily the right angle. I think that's maybe something CEOs are hearing from the board and exec teams are talking about, right? Like, how do we stay above the curve? And I think marketing teams have a really important like space here where they really can push back on, okay, great, AI is part of our solution. Let's get back to the problem that we're solving. Instead of just pushing out that our products have AI, like, what issue is that solving? Yeah, and the three of us can speak to it, but we've been seeing it all over lately.
Yeah, I know. And that honestly makes me think of something that you mentioned earlier, Samyutha, around how, since our last episode, Apple had a big event, and they didn't mention AI once, which I thought was like very Apple, very slick. But yeah, like, what do you think the thinking was behind that? Like, just they didn't want to be another like hopping on board the AI train, or what do you think was going on there?
I feel like Apple's that cool girl in high school that's alternative and like
Yeah,
never does what everybody
not
else is doing,
mainstream. Yeah,
and like is on her own time and just oozes that like cool factor.
yeah,
I almost feel like Apple did it specifically to retain like cool elite
oh yeah,
girl, factor that they
yeah,
have, which I have a deep respect for.
yeah,
But yeah, I think it really speaks to like almost every single company's marketing strategy is augmented by including those two letters. And so I almost feel like it was a slight nod to some of the performative AI functionality that I think is just shopped around places. I also think that potentially Apple being sort of this like huge, incredibly thoughtful organization, even if that means they aren't to market first, they like really think through every action, being incredibly design oriented. I wonder if they don't want to come out with AI until they're really sure on what that means for them, or they're sure on what's happening. And that doesn't mean, don't get me wrong, I think Apple is working on generative AI capabilities to a T, but just probably on floor 54 and not necessarily like on the main stage. So yeah, I do think it was like a really thought out marketing move to not mention the words AI.
yeah. And I guess that makes sense because I mean, even with the rollout of like Bard and Bing's AI, there were some hiccups because they both wanted to be first, first out with that stuff. And I think maybe they have had some issues, haven't been as thoughtful, but Apple is so brand oriented that they're definitely gonna take their time to make sure it's rolled out to a T. So yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, definitely. That was really interesting to see, and I think it makes perfect sense. AI is definitely becoming, that term is becoming more of like a buzzword these days. As far as companies just using it to like hype up their own products where it didn't exist within those products before potentially. And I think in kind of tying it back to the report, I'm looking at a chart right now that says the third like biggest concern or obstacle for people not using generative AI was I don't know how to use it. The fourth one is skepticism, and the fifth one is I don't see value at 31%, 30%, and 24%. And I think as a former and still kind of current contrarian, I am one who is like, whatever the buzzword is, whatever like the biggest trend that's going on now, I'm like, I'll look into that in a year and see if it's like actually still of value. So that could potentially be what other people are doing, or at the very least, like, because everybody's talking about AI, it might not necessarily be what it's on the tip of everybody's tongues, but then there's the conversation around like, okay, where does the value actually come? I don't know how to use this. And I think as the dust kind of settles around the use cases, as it settles around like ironing out some of the answers to the burning questions of like, can this actually take my job? And when people realize that it's not it's not going to be the demise of humanity and all these other lingering questions, there'll be more room for that general education. There'll be less skepticism. There will be more room for people adopting it, or at least like seeing where it would make sense for them to adopt it, either in their day-to-day life or in their professional life. So the idea of it being a buzzword right now, I think will die down, and as it does, then adoption will increase along with it.
And without this turning into a Jasper plug at all, I also just want to say that I empathize with the idea that it AI maybe wasn't making me that much more effective at my job in the very beginning. And that isn't because it's the technology, it's how I was using it and how I was interacting with it. And I think when Jasper rolled out brand voice and I was able to upload to Jasper complete brand documents on what my tone of voice was, on how I like to write, on different facts, and different knowledge, and feed that to Jasper and use the generative AI technology in the context of the project I wanted to get done, referencing a very specific set of facts. That changed my game. Like at that point, I did feel like, okay, I'm able to actually write a title and an abstract for a speaking session in 15 minutes, and it would have factually taken me an hour to do it. That's when I started to see these like really big ROI gains. So it's funny, even when friends ask me like, hey, can I use Jasper, or like, I want my company to have a trial of it. I genuinely say, I'm only going to give you the trial if you promise to use the CSM support and use Jasper brand voice. Otherwise, it's just going to feel like any other tool. So I think also a big part of it is like really committing to say like, how am I going to make the most of this tool, and how am I going to adopt a tool for my entire team that I can grow with, that I can invest in. And so that's an interesting angle. I'm excited to redo this survey in a year and see what changes. And my hunch here is that a lot of the questions we asked will be like so irrelevant by that point.
Because to your point, I think of the category Alton was just talking about, where it's like, why aren't you using this stuff? The biggest one was just like around generic outputs and like factual inaccuracies and stuff. And like brand voice really kind of takes that out of it when, you know, I can upload 5 of my tweets and Jasper can spit back at me exactly my tone of voice. And then I can go edit blogs using like humor and sarcasm and everything else that kind of goes along with how I actually speak and write and talk. So yeah, like you said, this is going to look so different a year from now, and I'm super excited about it. But yeah. Was there anything about the report? I guess we kind of talked about what surprised us the most. What was like the least surprising thing that you saw that you were like, yeah, totally expected that?
For me, it was the fact that, let's see, what aspects of generative AI are you most concerned with? And the number one answer at 36% was factual inaccuracy. And for me, like, that makes perfect sense, because whenever I'm using these tools, I am always keeping that in mind. That is definitely my biggest hesitation as someone who professionally, like, writes articles that I try to incorporate as many objective facts, statistics, things like that into my writings as much as I possibly can. And I have to be really careful about what I ask a tool like Jasper, Chat GPT, because of those factual inaccuracies. And to get personal for a moment, I tore my Achilles tendon a month ago, and whenever something like that happens, I feel like a lot of us go down the WebMD rabbit hole of like, what are my symptoms, or like, how long is this going to take to clear up, stuff like that. So I was like, should I ask ChatGPT what my like healing is going to be like? And I was immediately like, no, that's a terrible idea, because it might tell me that I'll be able to climb Mount Everest like 2 weeks after surgery. And no, absolutely not. And
those hallucinations.
Yeah, exactly. So, and even in my discussions with certain like experts in and around this space, they were saying, don't ask it like higher stakes questions around anything to do medically, anything to do legally, because of those hallucinations. So that can even translate to even just, the more basic questions it might hallucinate on. So the fact that showed up in the results at the number one thing wasn't too surprising for me at all. One that I'm surprised didn't rank higher was, well, 2 of them, bias and plagiarism. Because when ChatGPT initially came out, I feel like those were 2 of the biggest conversations that a lot of people were having, where like bringing up old examples of an AI chatbot that Microsoft released that was immediately pulled off of Twitter because it was spouting a bunch of racist and biased stuff. And once people found out that the models were trained on data, like basically the internet, everyone was worried about, or at least a lot of people were worried about plagiarism. So I was really surprised that those didn't rank much higher than they did. But I think with time, like time is what kind of allowed those to dissipate, because we did this survey, or at least like released the questions in early spring of this year. So there was a few months in between those conversations in November when ChatGPT came out and when we did the survey results. And I think there's been a lot of like work to show that, yeah, there still needs to be some work done on biases, but it's not as big of a deal as we initially thought. And plagiarism is not nearly as much of a concern as it was initially thought as well.
Also, just security in general is something that I see that's creeping up as like the new kind of media take that we're seeing across places. For example, we're talking a ton about how AI tools can help you at work, which also means like the company you work for is now assuming responsibility for the data you put in there, for the output, for how it's used, for your credentials. And, entire IT departments are now like, okay, what do we have a procurement process for these new AI tools? Like, what is a secure AI tool? What isn't? I know we've seen headlines in the news about, leaks of
Yeah.
different AI tools and credentials. Like, it makes it tough to be a champion of AI within your team, saying like, let's go get it. Let's get the tool. We're going to be sort of this like you pushing the envelope type marketing team. And then to be faced with all of these things that feel so out of your control that you're like, hold on a minute. I don't want my name attached to the tool that causes some sort of like severe security threat within my company. Like that feels out of my wheelhouse. So I empathize with that a lot.
Yeah, no, and I think it just makes perfect sense as the adoption grows, especially among like enterprise level companies. Like, I don't know, that we're going to be seeing a lot of that, and I think that's the next little messy bit that gets fixed in all of this. But yeah, I know lots of people are working on that, including us. So yeah, well, I'm curious. We've talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious to know, next year when we do this, what what are y'all like excited to see what changes, or like what do you think will change the most in terms of the questions that we've asked and the responses that we get?
I think for me, the big one is it feels hard to ask ROI related questions right now. I mean, we can measure time saved and things like that, but I'm excited a year from now to understand all the content that's been created with an AI tool and to be able to measure its impact, measure the quantity and quality increases there, measure like the time saved within teams. Like, I don't know. I have a feeling that those metrics are really going to add up to like something substantial in society in terms of productivity
Yeah,
gains. So that feels like a really exciting one for me to track year over year.
yeah, no, that makes sense. I think I'm super excited to see responses to how do you like, are you afraid you're going to lose your job to AI? Because I am very hopeful that there will be tons of education and tons of just like reassuring use cases and um, around it, and people will be more comfortable with it and aren't going to be like as afraid of it as they may have been in the past few months. Yeah, I'm excited to see like more enthusiasm about it next year versus just like fear and skepticism. um, I think those numbers are going to skyrocket in terms of usage, and um, lower a bit in terms of like fear around losing your job.
I,
I
I
think,
also wonder. Oh, sorry,
go
Alton, go
ahead,
ahead.
you go.
I was just also wondering, like, how many people are then going to say, like, I actually got a new job because of AI? Like,
Yeah,
I was certified in XYZ AI tool, and that got me ahead, and I got a new job, or I got a promotion, or me being an early adopter paid off tenfold. And I now lead own departments. Like, I wonder how many jobs will be created if this is going to be a new JD around like forming an AI task force. Like we're already seeing some of those like vigilante AI task force where it's like an early adopter saying, hey, let's get a task force together and like figure out, how we're going to answer these questions. Like,
Yeah.
will that become whole departments? Will that become leads within specific niche
Yeah.
departments? Like I'm curious how the job market will evolve to match.
That's such a good point, job growth in this, because I mean,
Yeah.
even we're hiring an AI content marketing specialist. Like you're starting to see titles pop up for AI specialists, AI marketing, specialists. And I think it'll be similar to like any other new type of department, right? Like analytics or project management. I think you will start to see like AI project managers or, people specifically there to own adoption and implementation, which is so cool. Like that's probably one of my favorite parts of not only the time that we're in, but also just working at an AI company is that like, man, things are changing in a way that I've never experienced in my career, nor like thought I would experience. So it's just so cool to be like in this moment, a part of all the stuff that's happening, and to like think about how things might be different a year from now. I love it.
Yeah, big changes, and ones that seem like more than just a flash in the pan. Changes that seem like they're gonna stick. Changes are already being made, as you both mentioned, around like people coming into businesses with these skills in hand already, and how they could potentially like evolve within the context of a business. One thing that was mentioned in a supplementary interview that I did around this trend report with three professionals. Kelly O'Halloran was one of them, and she mentioned that there will even potentially be room for like AI consultants, for people to be individuals that work with companies and just tell them like, hey, you can use AI in X, Y, and Z ways to see X, Y, and Z ROI within your business or within your teams. And I think that is super, super interesting. I'm also curious to see some more of those niche use cases, both within businesses and within people's in like personal lives. I mean, just in the last couple months, I've heard so many stories about people being able to apply for double or triple the amount of jobs that they could previously, because these tools help them evolve their like resumes and their cover letters and stuff to be more personalized for whatever job they're applying to. And I just love hearing stories like that, because things like the job application process can be grueling. It's a full-time job in and of itself. So being able to see more people and hear their stories of just how they've benefited personally and professionally from these tools, I think will be really cool. And I definitely want to create some space in next year's report for some of those use cases, because the more people learn about that stuff, I feel like the easier it is to see yourself using a tool like this for something that we can't even think of right now.
Well, I'm curious, Krista, like, what are you looking for when you're hiring your AI content writer? Like, that job description is pretty net new in the last couple of
Yeah.
months. Like, who's coming to interview for them? What are you
Yeah.
looking at? What are the skills that are non-negotiable? And what are you seeing?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like seeing tons of people who are just so excited about this space and just want to be a part of it, which is amazing and so fun to talk to people about it. I think honestly, what I'm looking for is, um, you know, obviously this is all still new. None of us have a ton of experience in this space yet. So mostly what I'm looking for is like curiosity. Are you curious about how these tools work? Have you been testing them? Have you been using them in your own work, even if it's not Jasper? Like I think that's probably the biggest thing is just if you're going to be an AI marketing specialist, like you need to be curious about the tools and willing to learn them. And then also just looking for people who not only are curious about the tools, but like actually want to actually have a desire to like learn about content automation and just like actually using the tools to automate other aspects of your work. But yeah,
Are you finding you have candidates that have been like, yeah, I used to use Jasper at my last job, or I used
yeah.
ChatGPT, or I used another tool that kind of helped me put it together?
Yeah, I mean, definitely like of the people that we've been talking with a lot, they've all at least used AI, ChatGPT to some extent, and several of them have used Jasper. I think one girl was tasked with teaching the rest of her content team how to use Jasper, and this was way back like in the beginning, a year and a half ago, 2 years, when Jasper was very, very new, when it was still Jarvis even. So yeah, getting lots of people who kind of were took the initiative at their past companies to learn the tool and then kind of teach the team how to use it. And then I've had people who use Jasper to write video scripts, like they turn their blogs into video scripts for YouTube, which is probably something that we'll be doing quite a bit of. So yeah, it's been really fun to not only hear other people outside of our team. I love our team, but it's been so cool to hear other people outside of the company and how they are using AI and like how they're excited about it, and how they use Jasper. So yeah, it's been super fun, and we've had way more applicants that have actually used AI than I thought. I thought it was mostly just going to be people who were curious about it or wanted to get into it. But no, people are out there testing and using it for sure.
It's only gonna happen more and more.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Awesome.
Well, before we wrap up, do we have any like hot takes on all this data? Like, is there anything that you're just like, I don't know, that maybe you feel that you weren't expecting to feel about all of this? I can start if nobody has anything yet. I think that I'm a little bit like, I see y'all out there like pretending that you're not into AI, or like you're too cool for it, but like you're out there using it and you're out there like satisfied with the outputs that you're getting. I think that was probably my biggest take of like, okay, people are out there like talking smack and kind of hating on it on Twitter and stuff, but they're using it and they're liking it.
If you're hating on AI on Twitter, Krista knows about you. She knows.
I've probably made a meme out of you or something. But yeah, I see you. I see you.
I think a big one for me is we kind of covered this on our first episode of our podcast, but just that sometimes AI does feel like it's in the middle of like such a hype cycle that it's almost like it's hard to dive into it and have an opinion or be an early adopter or bring it to your team because it's so highly saturated. It doesn't even feel like you can have a point of view on a lot of things. I even feel myself trying to describe this, and even I almost can't even formulate my point of view, but I'm putting myself in the shoes, or maybe of my last company, of a team that's a little bit more status quo, markets the way that has a B2B manual on how to market, and to be the one to bring in AI. But then all of a sudden I have my day job, and then I have to champion this whole new tool, this whole new approach. And I'm now the evangelist that everyone has to come to spread the good word around. And I just can empathize with how heavy that might feel sometimes, is like being the AI person within a company, or even coming to the marketing team with a really great idea, and all of a sudden having the burden of being this AI task force on top of just doing your day job that AI is not going to completely do for you by any means. Like, you still have a complete day job. So I think that's kind of my big takeaway here from like surveying all these marketers and like seeing what their response is, and kind of like inferencing like inferring like what the emotional background of that might be. That's sort of my take there.
That is spot on, and I definitely agree with that too. And I think one thing that popped up into my brain too, based on that, is kind of the idea of like a lot of people are paranoid about it taking their jobs, and there's just a lot of discourse around like these really heavy topics. But we see this a lot with a lot of out topics far outside of AI, is that a lot of people who are the loudest and who are doing like the most fear mongering and things like that are the minority of people for the most part. Like the vast majority of people are not the ones online like ranting and raving about this stuff. And so I feel like that is kind of where we are with a lot of things around AI specifically right now. So I was, based on the fact that there is so much discourse around all these negative aspects of AI, I expected the statistics around people thinking it would take their job to be higher. But when after like seeing all the results and like writing the report, I feel a lot of optimism. I feel like people have a lot of optimism around these tools, and there's some charts in there that I don't have in front of me right now about like people's overall optimism and saying like, I feel more confident using this next year. Like what's your confidence level in using a tool like this next year? And there's a lot of confidence there. So I feel like right now there is, we're experiencing a case of a lot of people that are experts, a lot of people that aren't experts, being very vocal about some of these downsides. And that may be influencing the greater collective of people and how they might perceive these tools or how they might use them or not use them. But I think that will hopefully not be as severe in the future, you know?
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good segue to kind of close things up, Alton. Your whole commentary on the fear mongering and like, will it end the world? Will it save the world? Actually, Amanda Slavin, who's an incredible AI educator and influencer in this space, had this really great LinkedIn post the other day that resonated with me so heavily. And it was around the concept that AI is not going to save the world, and it's also not going to end the world. And a lot of that sits with humans around what we train AI to do and the angles and the influences that we're having on AI. And I just thought that was a really good perspective to have on it. It's not like, it's somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. And it feels like a really fun time right now to be the group of people that are primed to see where on that spectrum AI will go. And I know we talk about things like AI specific to marketing teams and like diving into marketers because we are marketers, but I think we're like people first, and like all of us care about those same things. So I think that's just a good perspective to have going into all these conversations.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I like to say that AI is going to end up being a lot more boring than people think. Like it's just going to be, like you said, it's going to be in the middle. And yeah,
Well, to our conversation the other day on the cover of Time magazine of the world's most innovative companies was Kim Kardashian with Skims, and OpenAI was like third down on that list in small print. So maybe we're all onto something.
You can't argue with Kim K.
Is Sam Altman the Kim Kardashian of AI? That's the question we will answer on our next episode.
Spoiler alert, he is. He is the Kim Kardashian of AI.
I love that. Yeah. Well, it was great chatting with you both today, and I'm looking forward to our next episode.
All right.
Most definitely.
See you later.